Fortunately, some things remain forever. For another 10 years, perhaps.
Okay.
Wow. Let's really dig into that one.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive, where we take a stack of fascinating material and try to pull out the nuggets
Absolutely.
that really matter. Today, we're going deep on the world of artist Bob Camblin.
I love it.
And for you, our listener, we've gathered his quotes. We've explored the key moments of his life, his artistic development,
Yeah.
and we've even looked at how others have interpreted his often enigmatic artwork.
Yeah.
So get ready for some aha moments as we explore creativity, perception, and those hidden layers that are often in art and life.
Yeah, that opening quote, fortunately, some things remain forever or another 10 years perhaps. I mean, that just throws you right into, just Camblin's way of seeing things.
Right.
It hints at this really interesting dance between permanence and, the fleeting nature of existence that
Yeah.
we find throughout his art and in his personal reflections too.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's precisely what we're going to try to uncover with you today.
Yeah.
We want to explore the wellspring of his creativity, how he perceived the world around him, and those often subtle layers of meaning that are woven into his art
Yes.
and the way he lived. Now, for this, we've pulled together a diverse set of sources, his own words, which give us these concentrated bursts of his perspective, biographical details that trace his journey, and then, interpretations of specific works, like more or less, from books, even online discussions.
Right.
It's a fascinating blend of his direct voice and how others have tried to grapple with his impact.
What's really interesting to me is how those different angles, converge.
Yeah.
So you get these raw, sometimes cryptic insights
Yeah.
directly from Camblin's quotes, and then you have the biographical information and the interpretations, and those really help to illuminate, those ideas, provide context, and maybe even offer some alternative viewpoints.
Right.
It's like putting together this multifaceted portrait of, a really complex individual.
Absolutely. And our goal today is to unpack that multifaceted take on art and life.
Yeah.
We're going to delve into his concept of creativity, his understanding of the artist's role, and those often unseen meanings in his work,
Yeah.
all while trying to keep things clear and avoiding that sense of information overload for you.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's begin with the man himself, Bob Camblin,
Yeah.
a figure who, despite being highly respected in the art world,
Right.
maintains a certain elusiveness.
Right.
It sounds like his artwork is quite rare and highly sought after.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's the biomaterial paints a picture of an iconoclastic figure, someone who went, against those established norms in the art world, and whose work is really held in high esteem,
Yeah.
by fellow artists and coveted by collectors.
Right.
There's a definite sense of mystery that surrounds him, and that's probably because his art across, various mediums isn't readily available, and when it does appear, it often commands some significant prices. So this scarcity, this definitely contributes to that enigmatic reputation.
Sure. Yeah. He was born in Oklahoma in 1928, and his artistic path, began at the Kansas City Art Institute.
Right.
Then, interestingly, he received a Fulbright scholarship to Italy.
Yeah.
That must have been a really significant turning point in his early development.
Absolutely. That Fulbright scholarship was, in the mid-1950s. It exposed him to the vast artistic heritage of Europe, particularly in Italy. And the sources say he was deeply impressed by both the old masters and Impressionism.
Oh, wow.
And Venice, in particular, became a kind of recurring source of inspiration for him.
Interesting.
So this immersion, this deep immersion in European art, it clearly had a profound and lasting impact, on his artistic journey.
After returning to the United States, he didn't immediately dedicate himself to his art.
Right.
He actually embarked on a teaching career at several well-regarded institutions, including Rice University, right here in Houston.
Yeah.
So it seems like he was navigating both the world of teaching and his own artistic practice for a long time.
Yeah, he held teaching positions at various places before arriving at Rice University in 1967. However, even during his time in academia, he consistently maintained a private studio and, actively participated in both exhibitions and artistic collaborations.
Right.
So clearly he was very, very committed to his own artistic exploration
Yeah.
alongside those teaching responsibilities.
Right.
And it's interesting that despite this long period, in academia, there was this pull, right, towards this more solitary and exploratory artistic life.
Right.
As we'll see.
Right. And that pull became a full shift in 1976. He made the radical decision to leave academia and dedicate himself entirely to a nomadic artistic life.
Right.
That's a pretty bold move.
Yeah, it was. It was a significant turning point.
Hmm.
In 76, he essentially stepped away, from the security of that academic life to fully embrace a life that was centered around his art. And he funded his travels through selling his work, accepting commissions, journeying through Italy, France, Ireland, Mexico, even the South Pacific.
Wow.
And this nomadic period really underscores his deep commitment to his artistic vision, and his desire to find inspiration in diverse cultures and landscapes.
And the heart of our exploration today focuses on his more personal work from 1950 to 1974.
Yes.
His drawings, musings that weren't really intended for public consumption.
Right.
So it sounds like we're getting a really unfiltered glimpse into his artistic mind during that time.
Exactly. These drawings and the writings from that period, they offer this unique and intimate window into, Camblin's raw thoughts,
Right.
emotions, and artistic processes,
Yeah.
unburdened by, the expectations or the pressures of the public art world.
Right.
So it's a chance to connect with the artist on this really, really personal level.
So let's talk about his artistic philosophy.
Sure.
What were some of those core beliefs that underpinned his approach to art itself?
Well, one of his central ideas is that art speaks directly to the soul, bypassing, the need for extensive interpretation or explanation.
Interesting.
He believed in a more immediate and visceral connection between the artwork
Yeah.
and the viewer.
Yeah.
And the sources also highlight the critical recognition that he received throughout his career, noting his artistic evolution from, intricate drawings to more organic forms, and this recurring fascination with life cycles and transformation,
Yeah.
and this really innovative way of blending drawing and watercolor techniques.
And then there's this Muchas Volantes style he developed in the 1970s.
Yes,
That sounds quite intriguing.
it is intriguing.
Involving optical illusions, drawing influence from Dada and surrealism.
Yeah, Muchas Volantes, which translates to flying flies or those little sweaters that you see in your vision,
Right.
was a groundbreaking style for him. It uses these dots and dashes in a way that creates, optical illusions, really challenges the viewer's perception and their sense of reality.
Right.
So this style emphasized this active viewer participation in creating meaning.
I see.
You might think of, artists like Escher or Dali in terms of that playful manipulation of reality.
Right.
And Camblin was exploring similar territory.
I also noticed that he had this tendency to sign his work as anonymous or anonymous artists.
Right?
That's quite an unusual choice for an artist.
It is. It is. This act, I think it reflects his belief in a more collective form of artistic expression
Yeah.
and a desire to really downplay the importance of the individual ego.
Okay.
He seems to want to shift the focus away from personal recognition and onto the artwork itself
Oh, right.
and its impact, on the viewer.
Okay, so it seems he also had this early engagement with social protests in the 1950s and explored human symbols in his work.
Yes.
Were there any particular artists or movements that significantly influenced him, during those formative years?
Our sources indicate that in his early work, which often depicted, social protests,
Sure.
he employed a style that was characterized by strong outlines
Okay.
and flat areas of color. He was also drawn to the work of the Italian artist Cremoni,
Okay.
admiring his skill in drawing, and to the symbolic imagery found in Etruscan terracotta figurines.
Mm.
So these early interests really shaped his, initial explorations of human symbols and his understanding of the subjective world.
And that transformative experience in Italy,
Yeah.
particularly his encounters with the art in the Uffizi Gallery and the rather intense imagery of the Capuchin catacombs.
Right.
How did those experiences shift his artistic perspective?
That time in Italy, was clearly a pivotal period for him.
Yeah.
He was deeply moved by the masterpieces that he encountered at the Uffizi and profoundly affected, by the evocative imagery of the Capuchin catacombs
Wow.
in Palermo.
Yeah.
And these experiences provided him with this visual vocabulary
Mhm.
of abstract figurative forms that stayed with him, throughout his career. And he often referred to these images as mummies
Interesting.
that kind of lingered in his imagination and heavily influenced his abstract depictions, of the human figure.
So it sounds like even specific early Renaissance works left a lasting impression.
Yes.
Like Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Primavera, right?
Yes.
And it's fascinating that Camblin would then reinterpret these classical themes, with local contemporary Houston references,
Right.
such as KPFT radio.
Exactly. He wasn't just, passively absorbing those historical influences.
Right.
He was actively engaging with them,
Yeah.
reinterpreting them through, his own lens and his lived experiences. And that reference to KPFT radio in his reinterpretation of Birth of Venus is a fantastic example
Right.
of how he layered, contemporary and personal meaning
Yeah.
onto these established artistic frameworks,
Right.
making them distinctly his own.
Now let's move into some of Camblin's own words, those really insightful
Right.
and often quirky
Right.
observations we find in his quotes.
Yes.
The one about permanence and impermanence that we started with.
Right.
Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years perhaps, really sets a tone.
It does. That quote perfectly captures his playful yet deeply philosophical way of looking at time.
Right.
It's a very humorous acknowledgement
Yeah.
of the inherently fleeting nature,
Yeah.
even things that we perceive as permanent.
Yeah.
It really makes you consider, what we consider to be lasting and the true duration of that forever.
Then there's his connection to nature and loss in the quote, 3 cottonwood trees, dense cluster of new branches, now with them gone. Look,
Yeah,
it feels so simple, almost like a haiku.
it does.
Yet it carries this real weight of observation and perhaps a subtle hint of sadness for what's lost.
Absolutely. It's a very concise and evocative observation.
Yeah.
The sudden shift with now with them gone,
Yeah.
and then the imperative look
Yeah.
at the end. I think it suggests this change in perspective, perhaps a way of finding a new form of beauty or a different meaning
Yeah.
in the absence.
Right.
And it really highlights his keen sensitivity to the natural world and the impact of change and loss.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing emerge is this consistent theme of nature as a mirror for human experience and a source of, profound observation for Camblin.
He also touches on memory and aging with, as they approached the memory of songs and music stopped at the moment the texture of its decay became visible to them. Sad how we all aged at that moment in time.
Yeah.
That's a beautifully melancholic image, the idea of a memory decaying.
It is. It speaks to the way, our memories can fade
Yeah.
or become tinged with the inevitable reality of
Right.
time passing.
Yeah.
The concept of the texture of decay
Right.
becoming visible within a memory. I mean, that's a particularly powerful and poignant way
Yeah.
to describe, the experience of aging and the evolving relationship we have
Yeah.
with our own past.
Here's one that really feels like it encapsulates his artistic philosophy. Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both.
Yeah, this quote really beautifully illustrates, his belief in the fundamental interconnectedness
Yeah.
of these seemingly disparate
Yeah.
fields of inquiry.
Right.
So he sees this core truth, or this essential understanding that can be accessed through science, magic, philosophy, and art.
Yeah.
And it suggests that these different pathways can lead to similar fundamental insights.
Right.
And that these disciplines aren't necessarily mutually exclusive.
This one made me chuckle. I will stick with common sense and try for the perfectly average view of the universe. I think that will let me enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic. That's a wondrously grounded yet open-minded approach to the extraordinary.
It is. It's very down-to-earth way, I think, of expressing this desire to remain open to both, the rational understanding and the potential for wonder and amazement.
Yeah.
That might lie beyond the strictly scientific, so
Right.
that perfectly average
Yeah.
becomes this space where both, scientific explanation and the possibility of magic can coexist.
Yeah.
And where miracles can be appreciated from multiple perspectives.
And then he defines the sixth sense as being without a doubt. The sixth sense is to be without a doubt, senza dubio, no doubt.
Right.
That's a very direct and almost assertive definition.
It is. It is a strong and perhaps, slightly unconventional statement.
Yeah.
And he's equating the sixth sense not with, some mystical or extrasensory perception,
Right.
but rather with a state of unwavering inner conviction
Right.
or certainty.
Yeah.
It suggests that true insight and understanding come from a place of deep self-trust.
There's this quote that hints at a real internal struggle.
Okay.
Bright day, and I soar, how cruel that my soul is attached to this earth, and yet. That feeling of being pulled in different directions, the earthly versus the ethereal, feels quite universal.
It does. It speaks to that really classic human tension between our aspirations and our grounded reality.
Right.
The spiritual yearnings versus the constraints of the physical world.
Right.
And that, use of the word cruel
Mm.
that just adds a layer of poignancy
Yeah.
to that feeling of being, tethered to this earthly existence, even when your spirit, you know, feels a desire to take flight.
Here's a strong one on self-honesty.
Okay.
I cannot tell a lie to myself for very long.
Right.
And then he follows it with, find something in nature that completes you, and then surrender.
Okay, so the first part of that quote speaks to this commitment, right, to a deep level of self-awareness and honesty.
Yeah.
And the second part, the idea of finding completion in nature and then surrendering to it, I think that suggests this potential path
Right.
towards resolving that internal conflict we just talked about, right?
Right.
Finding peace and truth by connecting with the natural world and letting go of the need for constant control.
He has this interesting take on evolution. The light is all you need. The end is to evolve by doing the best you can. The means is to amplify what you're doing and believe. That's a very action-oriented and almost self-determined view of progress.
It is. He seems to be simplifying, the process of evolution down to focused effort and a strong sense of belief.
Yeah.
So it's about, actively engaging with the world, consistently striving to do your best,
Yeah.
and having faith in your actions as the primary engine for personal growth and change.
This quote feels almost like a recipe for maintaining one's inner equilibrium. In the balance, patience, and yet. Freedom again, and yet, in silence, the reality can be maintained.
Yeah, it's beautifully balanced and almost poetic
Right.
set of conditions
Yeah.
for finding and sustaining your own sense of reality.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of equilibrium,
Yeah.
the need for patience,
Yeah.
necessity of freedom,
Yeah.
and the power of silence as key elements in navigating the complexities of existence.
He also discusses the evolving purpose of art. Art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake. That feels very relevant to contemporary discussions about the role and function of art.
Absolutely. He's suggesting a shift, I think, away from this purely aesthetic or detached view of art
Right.
towards something that's much more integral,
Right.
to human experience.
Yeah.
Whether it's about creating personal meaning, navigating life's challenges, or even addressing this fundamental need for survival, broadly defined.
This one's quite striking and full of paradoxes. Step off the train of thought to find the power that is no power, to do the work that is not work, to laugh the true laugh, bending is not bowing.
Right, it's a call to transcend our habitual, linear, rational modes of thinking,
Right.
to access a different kind of power.
Right.
That comes from letting go of the mental clutter,
Yeah.
from engaging in effortless action and from experiencing a genuine, unburdened joy.
Right.
And that final phrase, bending is not bowing, I mean, that just adds a layer of resilience and maintaining your integrity,
Right.
even in yielding.
And a very practical observation about our mental states. When you think, don't act. When you act, don't think.
Exactly. It emphasizes the importance of focusing your energy
Right.
and attention,
Yeah.
giving yourself fully,
Yeah.
to contemplation when you're in a thinking mode and fully to action
Yeah.
when you're engaged in doing, rather than trying to divide your focus
Right.
and perhaps diluting the effectiveness of each.
His observations of nature and the cosmos are often beautifully poetic, like this one. The cosmos waves as me with tree leaves.
Yeah, that's a beautiful example of his ability to find deep connection and resonance,
Right.
between that vastness of the universe and the intimate details of the natural world.
Right.
Conveys a profound sense of being part of this much larger interconnected whole.
He also documented these fleeting moments of experience, which he called acts. For instance, on the tower we set facing the Clydes, Act 1, the White Mountains, Act 2, the Cold Wind, Act 3, the lightning.
Yeah.
It's almost like a condensed haiku-like way of capturing a sensory experience.
It is. It's a way of framing a sensory encounter,
Right.
breaking it down into its key elements and highlighting the unfolding drama of the natural world.
Right.
So it really shows his attentiveness to the present moment and this ability to distill, this complex experience
Yeah.
into its essential components.
Some of his observations are just so quietly poignant, like, he walked by so slow that my writing slowed, my heart and also the wind. That's remarkable, capturing a feeling of stillness.
It is. It's a testament to his sensitivity
Yeah.
and his ability to perceive and articulate the subtle ways in which the world around us, can profoundly affect our inner state,
Right.
even to the point of seemingly influencing the very element.
And then this simple yet deeply resonant statement. There is one joy that exceeds all other, and that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
It leaves so much to our imagination, that hint of an ineffable joy.
It does. It suggests a profoundly personal and perhaps indescribable experience of joy.
Yeah.
One that he chooses to keep private,
Yeah.
perhaps because he feels its depth can't be adequately captured,
Right.
by words.
His preference for quiet observation over argumentative debate comes through so clearly, and much better than arguing is to look at my watercolor palette.
Yeah.
That's a sentiment many artists, and probably many non-artists, can deeply appreciate.
Absolutely. It speaks to the idea that sometimes the most meaningful insights
Right.
and connections
Yeah.
can be found through, direct contemplative observation and engagement
Yeah.
with the world rather than through the often fruitless exercise
Yeah.
of intellectual conflict.
He has a really interesting way of looking at the fundamental elements of light and shadow. White is light, black is absence of light, but people are seen.
Right.
That adds a layer to how we perceive and understand each other.
It does. It's a seemingly simple yet thought-provoking observation about perception and the human condition. And even though black is defined, by the absence of light, people in all their complexities and variations are still distinctly seen
Right.
and recognized.
And this one is almost like a direct address to his creative inspiration. Well, that's enough about me, Mother Nature. Let's talk about you. What do you think of my last picture?
It's charmingly self-aware and hints at a deep connection.
It's a wonderful glimpse into his personal relationship with the natural world.
Yeah.
Almost as if it's a collaborator
Yeah.
or a critical audience for
Right.
his work.
Right.
So it shows a sense of humility and a profound connection
Yeah.
to something much larger than himself. He also captured these very immediate, almost stream of consciousness thoughts. 5 thoughts crashed at South Blivity and Mandel, followed by this seemingly random list of images.
Right.
It's like a snapshot of his mind in motion.
Exactly. It's a raw and unfiltered glimpse
Yeah.
into that associative and often nonlinear nature
Right.
of human thought,
Right.
much like, the rapid cuts
Yeah.
and unexpected juxtapositions you might encounter
Yes.
in surrealist art.
His paradoxical advice on how to end arguments with optimists and pessimists
Yeah.
is quite amusing. When you end an argument with a pessimist, you say, "You're absolutely right." With an optimist, you say, "It's a banana."
Right. It's a humorous and rather insightful way
Yeah.
to disarm and perhaps gently highlight,
Right.
the inherent perspectives of optimists and pessimists.
Right.
And it suggests that sometimes the most effective way to end, this pointless debate is to simply acknowledge
Right.
their viewpoint in a completely unexpected way.
This is a really key point about the nature of communication.
Okay.
If you argue or if you agree, you may learn, but you do not communicate. That's a really important distinction to make.
It is. True communication goes beyond,
Right.
mere agreement or disagreement.
Right.
It involves a deeper level of exchange
Right.
and mutual understanding
Yeah.
that may not always occur within the framework of an argument
very right.
or even in simple consensus.
I love this metaphor he uses. The gate stays open, the fence is broken, he keeps searching, but does not know the size of his quarry. Yet he has faith.
Yeah.
He looks in all directions. If he could only see all around, all at once. It feels like it speaks to the very essence of the artistic quest, that persistent drive, even without a clear goal.
Yeah, it's a powerful metaphor, I think, for the often uncertain and open-ended nature
Right.
of creative exploration or
Right.
any deeply meaningful pursuit
Right.
in life.
Yeah.
There's this sense of unwavering persistence fueled by this underlying faith, even in the absence of a clearly defined objective.
He also draws a distinction between revolution and evolution. Revolution leads to changes. Evolution is change. The first will be man's misunderstanding. The second is understanding the balance will be found in our minds. Individually now, perhaps collectively later.
Right. So this highlights his nuanced view of, societal transformation.
Right.
And he seems to see revolution as potentially leading to, superficial changes
Right.
that may be based on misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Whereas evolution represents a deeper, more fundamental shift
Yeah.
that's rooted in in genuine understanding
Right.
with a potential for both individual
Right.
and eventually collective,
Right.
realization and
Yeah.
change.
A simple truth, powerfully stated. You never miss the water until the wells run dry.
Exactly. It's a concise and universally relatable reminder of how we often take, those essential things
Right.
for granted until they're gone.
Right.
And it really underscores the importance of appreciating what we have in the present moment.
His haiku-like observations of nature
Yes.
are also incredibly beautiful, like 6 starlings sitting among broken branches. Look, no buds are growing. There's a stark beauty in that image and perhaps a subtle undercurrent of melancholy.
Yeah, these short, evocative observations capture a specific moment in the natural world,
Yeah.
often with these subtle emotional resonance.
Right.
They really reflect his ability to find poetry in the everyday details.
And another one that offers a shift in perspective. Every day, the clouds circle our tower as if we again were the intruders. That really makes you reconsider our place in the natural world.
It does. It cleverly flips the typical human-centric viewpoint, right?
Right.
Suggesting that perhaps we are the ones that are out of place within the natural order.
Yeah.
And nature's constantly observing us almost as if, we're the newcomers.
He also finds these poignant parallels between the natural world and human experience. There, beneath those rocks, poor fish, trapped by the changing tides, so much like us. That feeling of being caught by forces beyond our control is universal.
Absolutely. He uses these keen observations of the natural world
Right.
as a way to reflect on this broader human condition.
Right.
Finding relatable struggles and experiences
Yeah.
in the seemingly simple events unfolding around him.
Even his thoughts on something like reincarnation have this whimsical quality. It wouldn't be too bad to come back as a fly if you knew your body would shine in the sun that way. There's a real lightness and appreciation for even the smallest forms of life.
Right. It shows his wonderfully playful imagination
Right.
and his capacity to find beauty and wonder in the most unexpected places,
Right.
even in the seemingly insignificant existence of a fly.
He translates his artist's eye into haiku as well. Darning needles sew shimmerline tapestries of
Wow.
blue, green, and white bands. The visual detail in that short form is so vivid.
Yes, he's effectively using, that concise structure of haiku to capture this very specific visual image with precision
Right.
and a touch of poetic language. So it's another example of how his artistic sensibility just permeates
Yeah.
his writing.
And another one that's a bit more enigmatic. Bleached, textured, and white. To taste and sight, pray ever avoid the lamp fate. That one has a slightly darker, more cautionary tone.
It does. It evokes this sense of fragility and perhaps a subtle warning,
Right.
leaving that lamp fate
Yeah.
open to interpretation,
Right,
but,
yeah.
but suggesting a potential danger to be avoided.
And this one seems to capture the very essence of creating art. Canvas rectangle. Summer light, calligraphy. Mystic and complete. It's both incredibly simple and deeply profound.
Yeah, it beautifully highlights the fundamental elements that come together in the act of making art.
Yeah.
The physical surface, the influence of light, the artist's gesture,
Right.
and the potential for something truly transcendent
Right.
and
Yeah.
whole to emerge
Yeah.
from these basic components. Host.